Okay, so what's my first step in this? Do synthetic division. How do I find out what I'm going to use for my R in synthetic division? I need to graph it. I can look at the factors of the first term and the last term and guess and check. That takes a lot of time. So I showed you how to graph it. That's going to be the most ideal way. This is the graph that I'm going to be putting on your blackboard. Learn, it's a free online graphing. So let's go ahead and graph it into this here. We're going to graph our function here. So you graph it on your calculator and I will graph it on my calculator on the free function. Alright, so once you graph it in your calculators, we look here and we can easily see one of the roots. What's one of the roots that you can easily see? Your calculator is probably easier to see. So the 0 here is at 1, 2, 3, negative 3. So I'm going to come over to my function, and negative 3 is my R that I'm going to use to do synthetic division with. So I plug in negative 3, I bring down the numbers that are in front of my variables. I make sure that every variable, every exponent is accounted for. So I have the fourth, the third, the second, the first, and negative 12 is actually x to the 0 power, which is 1. And then I do my synthetic division. I bring down my first term. I multiply here. I add my columns. So I have 1. I always multiply back there, negative 3. I add my columns. I always multiply back. I add my columns. I multiply back here, and I get 0, which is what I knew I needed to get. Now what I can do is I can write my factors that I have. I have my first factor, which is x minus r, which is negative 3. So that's going to be x minus 3. And here, to write down what my new polynomial is, I'm going to reduce my exponent by a factor of 1. So if it's 4 up here, I'm going to write, it'll be to the third power here. So this will be 2x cubed. I keep my sign, so plus 1x squared minus 5x minus 4. So now at this step, I look at my polynomial and I decide, can I factor it? Is that factorable? Could I do factor by grouping?
No.
I can't, because if I group here in my first term, if I factor out the x squared, I'll be left with 2 plus 1. And I know that I can't factor out anything to get 2 plus 1. So I can't do factor by grouping. I need to reduce this again by another factor. So I'm going to go over to my graph and I'm going to say, is there another 0 that I didn't see? So this 0 here is not going to help me because I can't see that 0. Now I come over here, there's actually 2 zeros here. Oh, this is nice. So in your calculator, you would do, there's 2 zeros. This one is at negative 1, 0, and this one's at negative 1.186. I would not want to use that. That's a very specific answer, and you're going to need to give the exact answer, but you can use negative 1. Okay? So we're going to come over here, and I'm going to use negative 1 as my new r. Now I'm going to use this polynomial. I'm going to divide out. Because there's nothing, the question is, how could I not factor by grouping? Here, if I factored out an x squared, what I would be left with is a 2x plus 1. There's nothing over here that's going to look like 2x plus 1. So factor by grouping is not going to help me. So at this point, I'm going to do synthetic division with this polynomial here. So I bring down these numbers. And I always bring down my first term, and then I multiply back to my r. I write my answer here, and then I add my columns. Multiply back, add your columns, multiply back, and add your columns. So we get a remainder of 0, so we're very happy. So we have 2 roots here. We have 1 root here, or 0. We have 1 here, and then we're going to write what we have left here as our answer. So when I write those out, I've got x minus 3, which is plus 3, x minus 1, which is plus 1. And to write this quadratic, I reduce the factor by 1. This is cubed, so I know that I need to reduce my exponent by a factor of 1. This is going to be my x squared. So I'm going to write 2x squared minus x minus 4. So now at this step I have to decide, can I factor that quadratic? Can I factor 2x squared minus 4? So I'd like you to take a moment to attempt to factor that. So you're going to write your parentheses, factor your first term, factor your last term. Yes? Why did I change this negative? The question is, why did I change this negative 1 here, which was my root, to a positive 1 here? Right? That's the question? Well, what we do is we write this as x minus whatever our 0 is. So this factor would be x minus minus 1. That's what this factor would, and what is a negative? Negative? Positive. So that's where we get this positive here in this x plus 1. So, now, could you factor this 2x squared minus x minus 4? Was it possible to factor it? It was not. So how do we solve a quadratic that's impossible to factor? You must use the quadratic formula. So does anyone remember what it is?
Is it the one where it's
Yes. So opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now remember, when we have our quadratic, we always write it as a x squared plus b x plus c. And so these are the coefficients that we plug in here. Wherever we see a, I would plug in the number that's in front of my x squared term. So please take a moment to solve your quadratic formula. Watch carefully. So this first step is very important. First of all, let's talk about what my a is. So here, a is 2, b is negative 1, and c is negative 4. So I'm going to plug that into this equation. So I have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 4, all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. So a negative times a negative is a positive, plus or minus. It is very important that you actually write this step out. It makes your life much easier. It seems like it would be easy to do it in your head, but it's a bad idea. Write everything into the quadratic formula before you begin to reduce. Negative times a negative is a positive. This becomes 1. 4 times 2 is 8. So negative 4 times 2 is 8 times negative 4 is going to be positive 32 divided by 4. So I can reduce this. I would write my answer as 1 plus square root of 33 over 4. And another point is 1 minus square root of 33 over 4. And what are my other solutions? Well, I would go back to my roots here, back to my factors, and I would set each one of these equal to 0. So I would say x plus 3 is equal to 0, and I would solve for x, and I would get negative 3. And I would come back here and I would say x plus 1 is equal to 0. And I would solve that and I would get negative 1. Now I remember I got those when I graphed it on my calculator. And this, I could calculate this decimal and see if negative 1.029 is the same as 1 minus the square root of 33 divided by 4.